If you're over 70, you've likely noticed a pattern in your nights. You fall asleep, but somewhere between 1 and 3 a.m., your body snaps awake, your heart slightly alert, your mind slightly switched on, and the rest of the night becomes thin and fragile. Melatonin does decline with age, yes, but night cortisol rises even more, and that's what actually breaks the night. I'm Dr. Jonathan Reed, a physician specializing in sleep and aging physiology for more than 25 years, and I want to be direct from the start. I have 5 bedtime medications that can bring night cortisol back down, naturally, safely, and consistently. Not pills that force sleep, but compounds that target the exact triggers waking you up. Because here's the truth most older adults are never told. You don't fix night cortisol by sedating the brain. You fix it by lowering the signal that's waking you. That's why sleeping pills rarely hold the entire night, and high-dose melatonin stops working after a few days. They act on the surface. They do nothing to quiet the cortisol surge underneath. Harvard's Sleep and Metabolism Lab found in 2022 that adults 65 to 80 experience 30 to 50% higher night cortisol and 41% more micro-awakenings, even when melatonin supplements were increased. Cortisol, not melatonin, was the barrier. The 5 medications you're about to learn each shut down a different doorway of night cortisol: HPA-axis overdrive, glucose instability, sympathetic tone, rumination loops, and temperature-driven arousal. And medication number 2 delivers one of the strongest shifts I've seen in my clinic. Like this video, share it with someone who needs real sleep again, and subscribe so you don't miss the follow-up breakdown on cortisol-resistant insomnia. Number 5. L-theanine. L-theanine seems like a mild, almost forgettable compound, a small amino acid from green tea that most people drink without ever noticing a thing. But for adults in their 70s, where the brain's ability to power down has weakened and early night cortisol rises too easily, this gentle molecule becomes one of the most reliable tools to stabilize the beginning of the night. What many older adults experience is not trouble falling asleep. It's something more frustrating, drifting off, but not truly shutting down. The brain stays slightly engaged, not racing, not anxious, just unwilling to release control. It's the half-lit state where the eyes are closed, yet the mind is still listening. And when the brain doesn't downshift fully, the sympathetic nervous system follows the same pattern. It stays just active enough to keep cortisol elevated in the background, waiting for the first chance to jolt the body awake. This is why the first sleep cycle often breaks. The nervous system hasn't crossed the threshold into real rest. Cortisol doesn't fall smoothly, it stalls. That stall is the hidden cause of the 60 to 90-minute wake-ups so many seniors describe. L-theanine directly targets that early instability. It increases alpha brainwave activity, the rhythm the brain naturally uses when transitioning from wakefulness into calm, focused rest. When alpha waves rise, sympathetic tone drops, and cortisol begins its descent. Not because the brain is sedated, but because it is finally allowed to follow its natural path towards sleep. This is why L-theanine feels different from sleep medications. It doesn't blunt consciousness. It removes the background tension that keeps the brain on guard. A 2019 randomized trial found that L-theanine reduced salivary cortisol by nearly 20% within 45 minutes. In younger adults, that's helpful. In adults over 70, it can be the difference between a night that stays stable and a night that fractures before it even begins. Helen, a 72-year-old patient, came to me with a familiar frustration. "I'm asleep, but I'm not asleep." Her body would settle, but her mind stayed slightly alert. She'd drift off only to pop awake again in the first cycle, heart lightly active, feeling as though she had never truly crossed into sleep. We added 100 milligrams of L-theanine before bed. Nothing else. On the 4th night, she said, "It feels like someone finally turned the noise down." Within a week, her early night wake-ups had nearly disappeared. For most older adults, 1 to 200 milligrams about 45 minutes before sleep is ideal. It's gentle, safe, and non-sedating, and unlike many nighttime medications, it doesn't force the brain into unconsciousness. It restores the biological transition that aging gradually erodes. And once that first cycle becomes stable, the rest of the night has a far better chance of holding together. Number 4, inositol. When the brain finally begins to settle, many older adults expect the rest of the night to follow. But for a large group of people in their 70s, the next battle isn't noise in the nervous system. It's the quiet, looping thoughts that return the moment the body relaxes. That's where inositol becomes especially important. Inositol isn't a sedative. It doesn't shut the brain down or force a sleep. What it does, more effectively than most seniors realize, is steady the serotonin pathways that control rumination, the repetitive mental activity that lifts cortisol back up just when it should be falling. Nighttime rumination rarely feels dramatic. It's subtle, a sentence, a worry, a small mental replay. But in an aging brain, even mild loops trigger the same HPA-axis response as stress during the day. Cortisol edges up, sleep lightens, and one small spark is enough to break the night open. That's why inositol is different. It strengthens serotonin signaling in a way that quiets mental, spiraling without dampening cognition. When serotonin pathways stabilize, the background noise behind thoughts weakens. The mind stops grabbing onto small concerns, the stress response softens, and the cortisol pulse that usually appears in the middle of the night simply doesn't rise as sharply. Small clinical studies consistently show this effect. In adults over 60, inositol has been associated with a 22 to 28% improvement in sleep continuity. Not because it sedates, but because it prevents the rumination cortisol loop that breaks the second half of the night. For many seniors, that loop is the hidden reason they wake and cannot find their way back into sleep. One of my patients, Daniel, age 70, had what he called calm insomnia. He wasn't anxious. He wasn't stressed. But every night, around 2 or 3 in the morning, he would wake with a single unimportant thought, something he needed to buy, an old memory, a stray detail. And the moment the thought appeared, he was fully awake. Not panicked, just switched on. His cortisol labs were mildly elevated at night. His mornings felt foggy and unrefreshed. We added 900 milligrams of inositol at 7:30 p.m. He didn't feel anything dramatic on the first night, but by night 5, he described it perfectly. The thoughts don't catch anymore. He still had them, everyone does, but they passed like background chatter instead of pulling him into wakefulness. Within 2 weeks, his 3 nightly awakenings dropped to 1, and most nights to none. For older adults, 500 to 1,000 milligrams in the early evening is typical. It pairs well with any calming routine, doesn't sedate, and is gentle on digestion. The key is timing. Take it before the brain enters its pre-sleep drifts, so serotonin signaling is stable before cortisol has the chance to rise. Inositol doesn't push you to sleep. It prevents the mind from pulling you out of it. And for seniors who wake with a clear, quiet mind, but can't shut off the small loops underneath, it is often the missing piece that finally holds the night together. Number 3, apagenin, chamomile extract. As the mind grows quieter, another problem often begins to surface. Not thoughts, not worry, but a nervous system that stays just a little too alert. Many adults in their 70s describe it the same way. I'm tired, but something in my body is still on. That lingering tension, that barely perceptible hum under the skin, is one of the most consistent drivers of nighttime cortisol in older adults. And this is exactly where apagenin, the active compound extracted from chamomile, becomes far more powerful than the tea most people casually sip. Chamomile tea itself is mild, comforting, familiar, but the extract is different. Apagenin binds directly to GABA-A receptors, the same calming pathway many prescription sleep medications rely on, but without the sedation, the memory fog, or the rebound insomnia that so often follows pharmaceuticals in older adults. It doesn't overpower the brain. It reinforces the inhibitory system that naturally weakens with age. After 70, GABA signaling often loses some of its efficiency. The result is a nervous system that doesn't fully shift into parasympathetic mode at night. Cortisol stays a little higher than it should, heart rate variability stays a little lower, and sleep becomes light, breakable, and vulnerable to every small internal fluctuation. Apigenin helps restore that pathway. When GABA receptors activate appropriately, sympathetic tone falls, core tension eases, and cortisol drops into its expected nighttime pattern. A controlled 2016 study demonstrated that apigenin improved both sleep latency and sleep maintenance, two areas where older adults struggle the most. What mattered wasn't sedation, but stability. People fell asleep more smoothly and, more importantly, stayed asleep because the nervous system no longer spiked back toward wakefulness. One of my patients, Marlene, age 68, had relied on chamomile tea for years. She liked it, but it never changed her sleep. She still woke around 2 a.m. with a sense that her body had jumped, even if her mind felt quiet. Her sleep study showed exactly what many seniors experience: sudden microarousals driven by rising sympathetic activity in the middle of the night. We switched her from tea to a 50-milligram apigenin extract taken around 8:15 p.m. The change wasn't dramatic on night 1, but it was unmistakable by night 4. "My body isn't twitching awake anymore," she told me. "When I do wake up, it feels like I'm closer to sleep instead of being kicked out of it." That shift, from jolted awake to gently surfacing, is a sign that cortisol is no longer spiking through the early sleep cycles. For most adults over 60, 25 to 50 milligrams in the evening is ideal. It's gentle on digestion, does not interact with blood pressure the way some herbs do, and maintains its effect without tolerance. The key is consistency. Take it at the same time each night so the nervous system receives a predictable cue to let go. Apigenin doesn't sedate the brain into sleep. It gives the nervous system permission to stop fighting the night. And for seniors whose sleep breaks because their body won't fully settle, that permission is often the turning point. Number 2, phosphatidylserine, PS. By the time most older adults reach this point in the night, the pattern is painfully familiar. They fall asleep, maybe even sleep well for the first hour or two, and then, without warning, the body snaps awake. Not because of noise, not because of dreams, but because the brain's stress circuitry, the HPA-axis, never fully powered down. And that system, once overstimulated, is the single most common driver of nighttime cortisol spikes in adults over 70. Phosphatidylserine targets this problem at its root. Unlike calming agents, unlike herbal extracts, unlike melatonin itself, PS works directly on the hormonal loop controlling cortisol production. The hypothalamus signals the pituitary signals the adrenal glands, and cortisol rises or falls based on that chain. In younger adults, the chain shuts down automatically at night. But with age, especially after 65, that shutdown becomes unreliable. The signal weakens, cortisol stays higher than it should, and the 1 to 3 a.m. window becomes a minefield of sudden, unexplained awakenings. PS strengthens the off switch. It reduces ACTH, the pituitary hormone that tells the adrenals to release cortisol. And by doing so, it lowers nighttime cortisol directly. Not indirectly, not through relaxation, but through physiological correction of the HPA-axis. This is why PS has been studied repeatedly in adults over 50 and why the results are so consistent. Cortisol drops 30 to 35% at night with correct dosing. One patient of mine, Leonard, age 74, was the classic case. He was healthy, active, and mentally sharp. But every night, almost to the minute, he woke between 1:45 and 2:10 a.m. He tried herbal teas, meditation, glycine, magnesium, and even low-dose sleep medications. Nothing held. His sleep study showed the same signature I've seen countless times: a cortisol rise beginning in stage 2 sleep, pushing him upward into wakefulness long before dawn. We introduced PS at 100 milligrams around 7:30 p.m., giving the body enough time to absorb and blunt the hormonal surge before the first major sleep cycle. Within 5 nights, his awakening moved from 2 a.m. to nearly 4 a.m. Within 2 weeks, he slept 5 to 6 hours straight, something he hadn't experienced in more than a decade. He didn't feel sedated. He didn't feel knocked out. He simply didn't experience the abrupt cortisol-driven jolt that had disrupted his life for years. For most older adults, the ideal window is 75 to 150 milligrams taken between 7 and 8 p.m. It pairs well with inositol or apigenin, but should not be combined with blood thinners unless medically cleared. PS is not a tranquilizer. It does not override your brain. It resets the nightly rhythm your body once managed easily. And this brings us to the final, most powerful compound, the one that stabilizes cortisol through every pathway at once: temperature, glucose, and parasympathetic tone. The one that supports sleep not by force, but by rebuilding the internal environment where deep, continuous sleep is possible again. Number 1. Glycine. For adults in their 70s, the most stubborn sleep pattern is the one that seems to arrive out of nowhere. You fall asleep, drift for a few hours, and then, somewhere between 1 and 3 in the morning, your body snaps awake before your mind even knows what's happening. At that hour, the heart feels a little too present, the body a little too warm, the sleep too fragile to stitch back together. Glycine rises to the top of this list because it doesn't target just one cause of that pattern. It addresses the 3 systems that break down most with age: temperature regulation, nighttime glucose stability, and parasympathetic tone. The first system is temperature. Deep sleep requires your core body temperature to fall, but after 70, that cooling mechanism slows. The body holds on to heat longer, and the brain interprets that retained warmth as a reason to stay alert. Higher temperature means higher cortisol demand. Glycine helps reverse this. It improves peripheral circulation, allowing heat to leave the core more efficiently. As core temperature drops, the brain stops pushing cortisol, and the window for deep, continuous sleep opens again. The second system is glucose. Older adults often wake not because of a bad dream or bladder pressure, but because blood sugar dips just enough to trigger a cortisol surge. That surge doesn't feel like hunger. It feels like a sudden alertness, a vivid dream, or a small jolt from the inside. Glycine supports more stable nighttime glucose use, reducing the body's need to fire cortisol as an emergency fuel management hormone. When the brain stops getting those low glucose alarms, the early morning awakenings lose their trigger. The third system is the nervous system itself. Many seniors describe it the same way. My mind is calm, but my body won't stand down. That mismatch is a sign of weakened parasympathetic tone, the part of the system responsible for deep rest. Glycine enhances inhibitory signaling, smoothing out muscle tension, reducing micro-twitches, and lowering the body's background vigilance. It creates the physiological conditions where sleep not only begins, but holds. Research supports this multi-pathway effect. Several controlled trials have shown that 3 grams of glycine taken before bed can improve sleep maintenance by 25 to 35%, with especially strong results in adults over 65. Participants didn't describe sedation. They described fewer awakenings, less internal agitation, and a sense that their nights felt stitched together again. That was exactly the case with Harold, a 70-year-old patient who'd spent years waking 2 or 3 times every night. His sleep tracker showed tiny spikes in heart rate and temperature before each awakening, the biological footprints of cortisol trying to compensate for failing nighttime systems. He started taking 3 grams of glycine 30 minutes before bed. 4 days later, he reported fewer vivid dreams. By day 10, he slept 5 and sometimes 6 hours straight. My body finally stopped jumping awake, he told me. It feels like I'm sleeping through, not wrestling with the night. For most older adults, 3 grams is the practical dose. Powder in a small glass of water or in capsule form. It can be taken after a light snack or on an empty stomach. It doesn't dangerously drop blood pressure, doesn't interact with common heart medications, and doesn't lose effect over time. What matters most is consistency, the same dose at roughly the same time every night. Glycine doesn't sedate your brain. It restores the nighttime conditions your body has slowly lost with age. When temperature, glucose, and parasympathetic tone fall back into rhythm, nighttime cortisol finally quiets, and the kind of deep, continuous sleep you thought was gone becomes possible again. Now that you understand how each of these compounds works, The real progress begins with timing. Because for adults over 70, when you take these supports often matters just as much as what you take. Start with one rule. Use only 1 or 2 compounds per night. Stacking all 5 won't make sleep deeper. It only confuses the very systems you're trying to steady. The goal isn't to overwhelm your physiology, it's to guide it. Here's the structure I use most often with my patients. If your main issue is a restless, overactive mind at bedtime, the evening should start gently. Take L-theanine about 45 minutes before bed. Its effect is subtle but noticeable. The body softens first, then the mind settles. If you struggle with rumination or emotional replay, add an inositol around 7 to 8 p.m. This gives it time to quiet the mental loops that drive late-night cortisol. Many older adults don't realize how much that mental hum is costing them. If your night's break after sleep has already begun, especially between 1 and 3 a.m., shift your focus to the HPA-axis. Take phosphatidylserine earlier in the evening, around 7 p.m., so cortisol production begins winding down before the first sleep cycle. If you need extra calming for the nervous system, especially on nights when your body refuses to switch off, use apigenin. It pairs well with L-theanine, but doesn't need to be taken together. And finally, if you want support for continuous, unbroken sleep, anchor the end of your routine with glycine 30 minutes before bed. For many seniors, this single step transforms the shape of the night. No caffeine after noon, no heavy meals within 3 hours of bedtime, and give each combination at least 5 to 7 nights. Your physiology needs time to respond. A routine is not just a habit. At this age, it's a biological signal. If there's one message I want you to take from this, it's this. Sleep does not collapse because you're older. It collapses because night cortisol rises unchecked. And that means your body can be guided back into deeper, more stable nights. These 5 compounds don't knock you out, and they don't force sedation. They work by restoring the signals your brain and body were already designed to follow, quieting the mind, lowering unnecessary nighttime alertness, steadying energy through the early morning hours, and helping the nervous system stay in its calm state long enough for you to reach real rest. For adults over 70, that steadiness matters more than intensity. One small, correctly timed intervention can shift an entire night. And several of my patients see their first full, unbroken sleep in years simply by choosing the right compound for their pattern. So here's your next step. Pick one method, use it consistently for a week, and let your body show you what's possible. Then adjust, refine, and build the routine that keeps your nights intact. If you found this helpful, let me know in the comments which compound you're starting with tonight. And share this video with someone whose sleep has been breaking the same way yours has. Your nights can change. You just have to give your biology the right signal